Hey guys, welcome. Lincoln Wright here, and today I'm going to take you through the steps that I use to paint up my K2SO base. Using these nifty products from Ammo by MIG, we'll be covering steps of primer, airbrush colors, using heavy mud and pigments. And if you'd like to know more about how I made the base and how I painted up K2SO, please follow the links at the top right of the screen. Step 1, let's lay down some primer. One of my favorite primers to use right now is One Shot Primer by Ammo by MIG. It's an acrylic, water-based product, no fumes, lays down super well, and I can pour it straight out of the bottle. Jar, yellow lid thingy here. Just give it 24 hours to dry and it's bomber. Step 2, let's lay down some colors. Now I painted this model by airbrush, so I'll also be doing the base largely by airbrush. Using my Air Cobra, also from Ammo, and it was released just the end of last year. It's really nice airbrush. And for each step, I'll drop in a couple of drops of this acrylic thinner. And we'll lay down some Shadow Rust as an intermediate background color. I'm using the paint basically out of the bottle, and after I've given it a really good shake. Most of the time when speaking with people, I would say like 90% of the time that they have problem with paints is that they mostly just haven't shaken it up, and I do it too. If you get that clear liquid, the transport layer coming out, it's mostly because we haven't shaken it up. So make sure that it looks good in the bottle, looks like properly mixed. And then I'm laying down here in a shadow pattern. We need to step it up. Black's a really good base to work from. It'll give it the right sort of, that grim dark look that I'm going for, but we'll need to bring it up, lighten it up in a series of intermediate steps. Now I've painted this model via airbrush, so I'll also want to do the base largely by airbrush. It's more of a style and thematic thing. I could equally do it well by handbrush, but I think the modeling hobby is benefits from giving yourself a theme and also even narratives for the models. There you go. I'm working it into all of the corners. I won't bother going across the stone palette just yet. I'll stay with the dark brown there, dark red brown for the groundwork. The dark brown gives it a very warm tone. Then using this new set, the SU35 Flanker colors, I chose the top two. See, night blue here. There's a couple of bluish tinged greys in it, and I wanted to use them to add a cold tone, a contrast across the base. So the base is going to have quite a few contrasts happening. Nice and loose at the start. I'm not going to get into masking just yet, and you can see already there's a really nice contrast there from the warm brown earth to the slight coolness of the slab. And smoothly transitioning in, we'll add a couple of drops of stone grey. I'll leave some of the previous mix in the cup so that the colour is interesting, and this will add a nice highlight to our slab. Oh, look out, Uncle Lank's doing some masking. This is the really easiest way, the most low investment masking you'll see me do. It's just a little white piece of card, and it was a little bit bigger. I cut it down so it would be easy to fit in shot here, and I just line it up against the side of the slab. I'm going for a sort of pre-shade effect overall as another theme for this base. I'm all about the themes. The themes are good. And simply spraying, I think some people call this a cloud pattern. I don't know, there's a lot of fancy words. But for me it's just I shoot into the middle and I leave some darker spots around the outside. It's a kind of a shadow thing. And you can see already this is adding a great deal of interest. The slab and the groundwork are looking very separate, and there's an awesome contrast across them. Now this will be the final, say, pre-highlighted color that I use, so I definitely want to get plenty of contrast in, so I'll let this run real time for you. I won't cut it down, and you can see how many layers and steps it took to build this up to full brightness. And it's not too many. I mean, the opacity of these paints, I just put in less thinner. I'm shooting it basically straight out of the little mini bottle. And after a couple of go-throughs here, look at that. Nice and bright looking. Excellent. Next up, let's lay down our intermediate color, Earth. Big fan already of this Earth color by Ammo by MIG. It's earthy. That's what I was looking for. It's a really good balanced color. I mean, some Earth products are quite red based and some of them are quite green. Some of them have a lot of yellow. This one, it's nice and neutral. So as an intermediate step, that's kind of perfect in going between my base red tones and the blue slab. Pulling out my card again, I'm laying down, see the blue underneath there? That helps work as a little bit of a shadow layer here. And I'll gradually build this up. This is going to be the primary step to lay the foundation for the highlights on the earthy section. Earth, that's why I'm using earth. The earthy section of the base. Sorry about the bad joke. Sometimes it seems funny in my head and then I say it, not so much. One of the things I'd like to point out here, can you see the muddy footprint? And you can see that little spot there that I keep doing. There's the, the coil on the ground and the other one. So I keep hitting that over and over to make sure that I'm building up enough contrast there. That's like a small focal point for this model. Okay, first of two highlight colors I'm going with, sand, washable sand here. And I'll just want to point out, I'm not using this for its extra properties. It's a different kind of water-soluble paint, and but they're useful. I mean, I didn't use those properties. I just used it as an airbrush paint in this instance, and look, it works just fine. I'll use that. I'll show you some of the properties. I've tested out the whitewash on one of my polar bear. So I did December, January this year, and I'll show you some more ways on how to use those paints in the future. But for this one here, you can see I'm laying it down as a final highlight step, and there it is. Boom! You see me hitting that that focal point there in front of the muddy patch. I definitely want a higher amount of reflectivity there to put a bit of some contrast into the contrast. You've got to make the base interesting to a point, but we shouldn't overdo it. It's a very fine line between giving old K2SO a place to stand, to help ground him in the narrative and universe, make it look interesting, but not take it away from him. We want the base to add to him and not take it away. Building up the color here, nice and simple. This paint, I was curious how it would airbrush during this step. If it would have different properties from some of the other range that I'm using from Ammo by MIG, but no, it airbrushes just fine. It's not particularly different in terms of dustiness or texture. It's actually really simple to use. Dual purpose is kind of nifty. If I can get another dust color paint from them, I'll test it and compare. But for now, this one not bad at all. You can see I'm leaving behind the shadow effect there. I'm not going to build up any more color around the muddy footprint. I wanted to leave that from the beginning, and that's one of the contrasts that I was talking about. You can see now there's a bright contrast from the slab, which I'm going to have as a very dry point on the model, and the muddy step, as you can guess then, is going across to wet. So there's a bright to dark as well as a what would you call it, like a moisture or wetness gradient, and putting these multiple gradients in it just makes it more interesting, and it was fun to make too. Lastly here with sand, I'm altering the color ever so slightly to bring some coherency between the two sections, so a light spray of sand onto the slab as well. For our third step, let's do some heavy mud effects, and for this I'm going to be using wet mud from Ammo. And it's a very interesting product. It's enamel based. On previous steps I've used some of the acrylic based mud effects. This one's a heavy enamel, and it's a volume. It's not a thin paint, it's a volume producing product, which is very interesting because due to it being enamel based, we can use odorless enamel thinners, and it gives us a wonderfully long drying time to start building it up and working it into our effects. And one of the really cool things was that I allowed the acrylics to dry out overnight. I laid them all up basically in one sitting. It was very fast. What you can do then is, because they're all acrylic, water-based acrylics, they can breathe out through one another. The layers then vent and dry out. I let that go overnight. The smell, you know how acrylics, it's not a fume, but it's a very light smell. Was mostly gone in the morning, and so that gives me some confidence that they've mostly dried and cured. But here's the cool thing, because I'm layering an enamel based product over the top, there's not a lot of interaction, so that gives me a lot of confidence to develop that here. The second major reason is enamels give us that wonderfully long drying time. Actually, these took a little bit longer to dry than expected. It was about, say, 2 or 3 days, but to fully develop the shape, I'm not rushing. I don't feel, I'm up against it, trying to get this done while the stuff dries, which it sometimes can feel like that when working with acrylic products. This one, this is a major focal point and feature of this base, and it's such that I really wanted enough time to develop, and I did it in 2 stages. If you guys follow my Instagram, you can see I developed a primary patch first, and then knowing that I would take it further, I stretched it out by using the odorless enamel thinners, and it was really interesting to experiment with this. So let me just mention that this part of using this heavy enamel, this wet mud product, it's not really a tutorial so much as a just here's what I did, guys, an experiment together with you, because using these different products, we don't always know how it's going to turn out, right? So there's always a little bit of trial and error going on, but being enamel based, it's also quite recoverable. So this was really cool. It was fun to do, and the result is fantastic. I really love how it turned out. Next up, our last step is adding pigments, dry pigments to this base, and working them in with some odorless enamel thinner. Going for the top level here, I'm using an enamel based approach to layer safely and effectively over the top of our acrylic only base that was underneath. You can see I'm using Middle East. My vision here is that K2SO is supporting a Stormtrooper team on Tatooine, and I imagine them patrolling through Mos Eisley. Mos Eisley, to me, I could go with reference, but I generally tell people, I said, be careful of reference, because it can depend on the tint of the photo, and that was shot back in the 70s if we go with New Hope, so it can be different. I'll often use my memory. Now I know it's not accurate, I get it, but sometimes we need our models to look how we imagine them to look rather than how they actually look, and then it will look more right to you. And based on my result with this, this time it happened to work out for me. But that's just a little bit of an idea there I wanted to throw your way. It's not bad to go by your memory, and especially Star Wars. It's like a childhood memory for us, right? So I wanted to get that right. You can see, just using a soft brush, there's loads of pigment tutorials out there. I'm not really doing anything new here. I brushed them on dry, and then wetting dipping my brush into odorless enamel thinners. It's like a slurry. Is that the right word for it? It's not a paint, because it's a lot more transparent, but it helps work them into the base and helps them to stick too. You can use a pigment fixer for this step, but the ubiquity of the odorless enamel thinner just makes it really easy. And you can see what I mean in a step. I work it back towards the mud patch here. Once I've got these into a decent sort of color that makes Uncle Link happy. Now, not in the middle there, Link. Keep it around the outside, because you want to keep the inside of that foot area bright and like a spotlight. You can see I'm getting more and more brave with the thinner here, and then I remember, hey, this mud product is also enamel based. So you know what I'm going to do? I start blending the two of them together. Next, let's really load the brush up with odorless enamel thinner. The underlayers are also protected from this because of the construction, but the acrylics help to give it a nice barrier as well. Now, loading it up around the edge here, you can see I start blending in the wet mud product and spreading it out. If you leave it too thick, so what's English for that? I'm thinking katamaru. It's more of a it blends it out. It's not a glaze, but blending. It's blending it into the base. It's probably the best way to say it. And because it's a slight glossy product as well, you can see that it stretches out and it starts moving it into the base. Now about this stage, I'm thinking, I need a lot more mud. So I basically do this again with another thicker layer of mud to make it look like it's not just bantha doo-doo, right? It's lots of bantha doo-doo. Our second pigment color, light dust. Favorite product of mine. I like using it as a final highlight because it's as close to white as I probably really want to get, and I don't think I actually even own any white pigment. This one is going to go into the slab. Keeping with my theme, this is the dry section of the base and brighter. So a dry application here with a nice soft brush and stippling it into the base. It has pretty good adhesion properties itself without adding anything over the top. I will not add any top coat, varnish, or anything to this. The main thing to do is just stipple it in and work it into the base. The base is nice and dry, and that will help the pigment will stick to that just fine. The main thing to concentrate on here is to get rid of any of those telltale little clumps that you can spot when somebody hasn't worked them in. You go, you use pigment and you didn't brush it in. Those little clumps, it's really important to break them up. I like to use a splayed flat brush here and stipple it in. You can see I got the brush reasonably vertical there in a couple of spots. And acrylic paints as a base under that are perfect. It provides enough friction to really help it to sit in. And that's it, you're done. Hey, do you also like Warhammer 40k? We do. We're doing a group build in the Paint on Plastic Facebook group. Please check out the link in the comments below. I get my Star Wars kits, paints, and tools from my local hobby shop, Hobbyco. And let's do our part, support local, and check them out. If you're also in Australia, get your local hobby shop to contact Ryan at Hobbyco and they will get Star Wars in for you. Cool, right? Special extra big thanks to my Paint on Plastic co-producers Ivan, MB, Grant, Con, Jack, Simon, Robert, MC, Kelso, and Kevin. Big shout out to the Paint on Plastic supporter community who helped make all of this stuff happen. I couldn't be doing it without you artists supporting this artist. Thank you very much, guys. Sincerely.